Lord of the Rings screenwriter and War of the Rohirrim producer Philippa Boyens claims that the War of the Rohirrim film was chosen to avoid Rings of Power, Sauron, the Dark Tower, and wizards. Before we get into this, I'd like to ask you please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notification so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. Wrote this up over at thatparkplace.com. And speaking with Deadline, Boyens first revealed the rights that Warner Brothers has acquired for their various film projects, including the recently announced The Hunt for Gollum. She said this: "We have the rights to The Lord of the Rings and the appendices, and that's it." She went on to add, "I would love to see that expanded if there was the opportunity to do so, but there is so much that is in those 3 books. I know that especially hardcore fans of Professor Tolkien, they always get nervous that there's only so much story. But look at War of the Rohirrim. It's a page and a half at first glance in the books, but there are lots of threads throughout the book. I don't even think you need to look at the other threads throughout the book. The page and a half is chock full of a ton of information. There's numerous battles, there's political intrigue, there are clashing personalities. There's all kinds of things that are happening. There's corsairs attacking Gondor with 3 fleets at the same time that a group of Dunlettings and enemies of Gondor attack Rohan. There's so much stuff that is happening in that short 1.5 page that it clearly, I think, had the promise for a great movie. But let's go on to read why, or talk about why she chose the story. And I think it's a fantastic short story. If you haven't read it, definitely pick up Return of the King. Read that appendix, the appendice about Helm Hammerhand. It is absolutely fantastic. Great short story. But this is why she chose. This is one of the reasons she explains why she chose the story. She says, "War of the Rohirrim. It's 200 years before the events of the Ring, and it really is a standalone story. It was one of the reasons that I came to the story when we were looking to do something that would fit with anime. We wanted to do something that really had nothing to do with Rings of Power or Sauron or the Dark Tower or wizards even." So there you go. She said she wanted to do something that really had nothing to do with Rings of Power or Sauron or the Dark Tower or wizards even though the story ends with Saruman claiming the tower at Isengard as his base of power. So it does have a little bit to do with wizards, right? Nevertheless, she elaborated, saying, "It's a story about a people who are tearing themselves apart. So that felt like a really good fit, not only for anime, but to go into a new art form, which anime is, and try and tell a story based in Middle Earth without touching really upon the live action films, if that makes sense." So I'm going to disagree with her here. I don't think the story is really about people tearing themselves apart. It's really about kind of the political clash between Helm Hammerhand and this guy named Freka. And that's really what the story is about, and the results of that kind of political clash between the two. It's not really about a people tearing themselves apart. So that is a little bit concerning. That's kind of the theme that they are going to be going with there. And we've also seen some other disconcerting things. So but before we get to that, I do want to point out, like, I do think it's interesting that she says she wanted to do something that really had nothing to do with Rings of Power or Sauron or the Dark Tower or Wizards even, and obviously saying she wanted it to be something based in Middle Earth without touching really upon the live action films. So obviously, that is what she's saying. I think there's probably also something to that she wanted to distance herself from the Rings of Power, Amazon's live action show set in Middle Earth that focuses on the Second Age. It's really not it really doesn't have anything to do with what Tolkien wrote about the Second Age. It's basically the story that Tolkien never wrote, but he did write it in the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales and a number of other writings that were published posthumously. It's basically their vision of what they wanted Tolkien to write. That's really what they've done. And she says she hasn't seen that show either. She says that earlier on in the interview with Deadline. So I think there probably is something to do with that as well. She wants to have it distance from the Rings of Power, not really be attached to that. Probably because that show has a very poor reputation, really bad quality as well. If you watch the first season, you know what I'm talking about. But she goes on here and says this: "What it did for us, though, was reignite that passion for the world and for the work of Professor Tolkien. It absolutely has done that, and I think it surprised us. We fell back into the world really easily. It just felt like a natural fit. It also showed us, it certainly showed me, how deep that mythology runs and how much story is left to be told. This is something that Professor Tolkien did himself, and it is what worked so well. He drew upon existing mythologies to create this world. Now, that is definitely something that he did." But so I do think there's positives that she wants to distance this animated film from kind of what we're seeing in the Rings of Power, with the story about the Rings of Power with Sauron, the Dark Tower, and wizards. Obviously, they have the Stranger. We've already seen some concerning things from this film, and specifically from Boyens herself. So it was reported by Slash Film back in June 2023, a little less than a year ago, when they kind of showed off the film at the Annecy Film Festival over there in France, that the film would not focus on Helm Hammerhand, but would instead feature his unnamed daughter. Like, Tolkien doesn't name this daughter in his writings, but the film is calling her Hera, obviously being informed from I assume Greek mythology there, as the movie's main protagonist. Boyens defended this decision, saying everyone else dies. Before you start complaining, this is already in the text. And also, the story takes place centuries before the movie. So, not everyone dies in the story. That's absolutely incorrect. A lot of people do indeed die in the battles and the wars, including Helm Hammerhand, but not everyone does die. And that doesn't mean that you should pick someone who doesn't die to be the main focus on the film. I think Helm Hammerhand should be still the main protagonist of the film. He's the guy that kind of gets things kicked off. He's the one who leads his armies into battle. He's defeated. He leads them to Helm's Deep, to the Hornburg. He is besieged. They are starving. His sons are dying in the battle. So he goes off in like kind of like grief and misery and acts as this kind of like gaunt ghost and begins just absolutely savaging the Dunlettings. That's why the horn of Helm Hammerhand gains its mystique, because every time he blew it, he was going in and killing the Dunlettings in their camp. So there is that, and that's who the story should follow. That's what happens, and then obviously you can introduce other characters. You have Freyleaf, who comes in from the north, frees Edoras, and defeats Wolf, who has kind of claimed the throne at Edoras, and that is kind of what the story should be if you just follow the text that is written there. And instead, they have given this daughter of Helm Hammerhand a name and are going to be following her story. And I think that is definitely concerning. We also have Slash Film reporting that a scene in the film shows the politics at play in Edoras, with a Lord of Rohan wanting to erase the history of a group of female warriors and banner women to the king, a prelude of things to come. Now, this is not in Tolkien's text at all. Instead, like I said, the main political rivalry is between Helm Hammerhand and this man named Freka, who claims to be a descendant of King Freywine, but is said to be a Dunletting. And Freka asks for Hammerhand's daughter to be married to his son Wolf. Hammerhand rejects him by calling him fat. Freka responds, saying, "Old kings that refuse a proffered staff may fall on their knees." Hammerhand then kind of brings him into a council. After the council, he basically confronts him personally and punches him in the face, killing him in a single blow, and then declares Freka's son Wolf and his men enemies of the king. So 4 years after this is when kind of the war breaks out. There is an invasion of Rohan by the Dunlettings, led by Wolf, and then they were joined by enemies of Gondor that landed in the mouths of Lefnui and Isen. And the armies of Gondor were unable to come to Rohan's aid at this time because they were being attacked by 3 fleets of corsairs. So that is concerning too. So you're adding in this whole kind of feminist play here, something that Tolkien did not include in his writings. We also have a subsequent report about the film from the OneRing.net. They claim that the film would show the destruction of Edoras. The outlet reported this: Edoras is destroyed at the end of Act 1. We saw some beautiful art of a burned I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Meduseld, Meduseld, and the rest of the movie as about the wreckage of war. This is also not in the text and is in fact contrary to it. In Tolkien's story, Rohan loses to the forces of the Dunlendings and their allies led by Wolf in a battle at the crossings of Isen. After being defeated, Helm Hammerhand flees to the safety of the Hornburg, where the invading forces set up a siege. The invading forces also split with Wolf leading a portion of the army to Edoras to take the city. Tolkien wrote this: Wolf took Edoras and sat in Meduseld and called himself king. There, Helm's son, fell. Last of all, defending the door. So obviously an epic last stand that he ends up losing. The city was not destroyed. In fact, because we see here that Wolf sits on the throne and calls himself king, right? And then not only is it not destroyed in the that first attack, but as I was talking about, Helm's nephew Freyleaf, he actually comes down from the north and he reclaims the city. And this is what Tolkien wrote. Then Freyleaf, son of Hild, Helm's sister, came down out of Dunharrow, to which many had fled, and with a small company of desperate men, he surprised Wolf in Meduseld and slew him and regained Edoras. So there's some deeply concerning things here already that we've seen reported last year about this film. They're going to be changing Tolkien's text, and I think that is the wrong step to make. Now, who knows? They've had obviously a year to maybe make some changes. They've seen some feedback from this. They've seen that over 62% or whatever it was, 63% of people did not finish the Rings of Power, and how terrible that was. Maybe Boyens hasn't seen it, but I'm sure people have told her about it. Warner Brothers has likely been watching that, seeing that stuff. So maybe they have changed things. We know that Jackson and his team were going to implement some things that were contrary to Tolkien, specifically with Arwen showing up at the Battle of the Hornburg and killing orcs on the ramparts and things like that. There were set photos of that. There was obviously a huge outcry, and that was removed from the movie for the betterment of the film. So maybe they saw kind of some of the outcry of this, and they have gone back, changed it, and removed some of this stuff, and are now focusing more on Helm Hammerhand, focusing on the original text, and not focusing on kind of this feminist ideology that they were clearly injecting into it, with having Helm's daughter being the main protagonist, and then having a significant portion of the story, at least political portion of the story, revolving around this banner women. Utterly ridiculous. But let me know what you guys make of this. I do think it is interesting that she is kind of distancing herself from kind of the Rings of Power and what that show has done and what it is covering. And I do find that interesting. So maybe they have indeed made some changes. Maybe there's some hope there. But a lot of the stuff that we saw reported last year is deeply concerning for this film. But those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys make of this. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable to each other, but to always speak the truth.